All right, welcome back, shooters. We're jumping on here again tonight to go over episodes 3 and 4 of The Last Dance. Talk a little bit about what we saw tonight, some of our reactions, some of our big takeaways from tonight. Adam, how are you doing tonight? What'd you think?
Doing great. It was, we kind of talked about it jumping on here, or before we jumped on that. I think we need a little bit more Michael Jordan in this Michael Jordan documentary, but it was very interesting, just a couple aspects of it about Rodman and, the fact that his upbringing, how he got to the NBA. But I think one big question I'm wondering is, do you think you could survive a 2-day trip to Vegas with Dennis Rodman?
Yeah, no way, especially not now. I mean,
it would be a struggle for me to survive 24 hours, I don't think.
Yeah. Maybe like 10 years ago, I might have been able to keep up for a day or something, but now
that's probably a big maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's pretty wild. Between that and a couple spot shout outs to Miller Lite in this episode, I thought it was pretty interesting.
Walking out of a game with an open beer in his hand, that's a power move right there. And just, honestly saying, I don't really care what people think about me, which obviously he doesn't.
No, well, and he was killing one before he jumped on the bike too and drove off. It's just like, I mean, whatever, I guess.
But if it helps him work out, I guess you got to find your thing, right?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty funny too when they came back and Jordan was telling that story about how he's getting caught up in the get Rodman back into shape deal, and then he got everyone to hook in with his plan to go real slow, and then Rodman just comes out and busts them and ready.
Man, I remember some of those times too. One specifically stands out when I was at UNI that somebody got in trouble and we did wall jumps for what felt like hours and hours. And the whole time coach was saying, you can thank this person for this. You can thank this person for this. And I happened to be right beside him. And it was not fun. And kind of the same situation, get kind of caught up in that stuff. But the team thing, you gotta sometimes pay for your teammates' mistakes.
Well, and the thing about that though that's so different is it sounded like what was partially Phil Jackson's idea to let Rodman go, like, and be like, hey man, you go do your thing, whatever you got to do, come back ready to go. And
he at least said yes to it, which
right.
I mean, it was very interesting to me that, just kind of thinking of the game right now, the head coaches in the NBA, how many head coaches would, number one, even, I mean, I think about that, even consider allowing that to happen. And number two, he knew that would help him play better. He just needed that, 48 hours. How many coaches would have the awareness that would help a player? Because if I'm coaching and somebody asks me to go to Vegas and miss every single aspect of our team activities, I mean, I don't think I'd even consider that. That's just a no immediately.
I think one of the other things too about the episodes tonight that I picked up talking about that is you can tell when they talk with Steve Kerr and the way in which a lot of the things I think that he does and has had to do with this, similar situation in the personalities with the Warriors, how much he took away from his time with Phil Jackson. And how much of that philosophy he instills in the Warriors situation, and I just kept drawing comparisons to that all throughout this episode. One in the Draymond Green is essentially the now version of Dennis Rodman,
right.
And then the Steve Kerr to Phil Jackson and the kind of players coach mentality and the kind of playing chess when everyone's playing checkers kind of thought process.
Yeah.
And then at the end when they're talking about the changing of the guard with the Pistons, with the Bulls finally beating the Pistons, I was kind of thinking about that now too, and like how the Warriors been on this run and how's the guard going to change. And so it was just interesting to have several instances in which that brought me back to the Warriors dynasty that we've had the privilege of watching the last couple of years.
Yeah, and it will be very interesting to see how the guard essentially changes, but hopefully we get back to basketball here in a couple weeks, couple months, whatever that is, and then we'll be able to see that. But and I think that with the Pistons, you kind of mentioned walking off there at the end with the changing of the guard without shaking hands. a lot of people talk nowadays that, it was a lot more rough back then. It was a lot more, competitive back then because of that aspect of things. And I think that a lot of the game at the point in the 90s was like that, people hated to lose that much, that walking off without shaking hands was a valid thing to do in some people's mind. And I don't agree with that. I think Isaiah needs to just come to terms with it and just admit that it was the wrong thing to do. However, that aspect of things, I think, has changed quite a bit in the game at this time.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting too about how, because we all know about the Pistons doing that, but the way, like the Celtics having done the same thing, like I thought that was super interesting to see them put that side to side in the way in which that they essentially did the same thing.
Yep.
How all we talk about is the Pistons and the way in which that they handled it. And that was one of the other takeaways that I had too, was from tonight, and kind of the overlying theme in the way in which that things are handled differently, obviously now in a lot of aspects. But one of the biggest ones is the way in which that, the media essentially decides who we criticize and who we don't. They don't criticize the Celtics, but we do the Pistons. The same way when they talked about Jordan missing that free throw late, and then they just kind of skipped over it, and then they went on. All I could think in my head was like, man, if LeBron missed that free throw, like we would be talking, it would be front page. I mean, and just the fact that like we still to this day don't criticize MJ. It's just kind of like, it happened, but this is what he did. But like LeBron is treated so differently. And so that was one of the other things too, that's just interesting on how things are perceived, through the media, and then how we perceive them as the consumers, and being like, geez, that's crazy on how, it's not always maybe what we thought, but that was a couple of the big takeaways I had from that.
Yeah, I think, we mentioned it after last week's episode, so too, the like Scottie Pippen thing, where, I had no idea that it was a salary negotiation issue, because the only way back then that I got my news about sports was SportsCenter. And, now it's SportsCenter, it's, Twitter, it's Facebook, it's Instagram. You have all these different avenues that you get information from. And yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. Michael Jordan missed game-winning shots too, and you never hear about that, which because he made a lot too. And but you're right. If LeBron, if KD, if anybody else would have missed that's a superstar, we would have been talking about it for weeks at least.
And it's different times. I get that. And obviously we saw that tonight. I mean, and they touched base on it too. I mean, obviously the way the Pistons were playing, that would never fly. I mean, you're never going to be able to put two hands on anybody, let alone the league's biggest stars. And so it's definitely changed a lot. I would argue for the better. I mean, it got to a point where it's all about finding your competitive edge. But I mean, that was ridiculous. I mean, the way that the guys were playing, like that's just a bully's mentality, and like we're not as talented as these guys, so we're going to try to beat them up. Yeah,
and get them hurt essentially. But after the episode, I did a little bit of research, and they mentioned or like a trivia question was, Rodman had like 7 games where he had 0 points and over 20 rebounds. I guess first of all, that's insane just to think about that. Watching the NBA or basketball these days, that somebody scored 0 points and had that many rebounds and played that much. And I have a couple games pulled up here. He had 0 points, but 28 rebounds, 24 rebounds 3 times, and 0 points like that. I mean, if you think about a player playing in the game in the NBA right now, I mean, with the fact that he has that many minutes on the court and doesn't score a point, that's just crazy. It's absolutely absurd.
Yeah, wouldn't happen now. I mean, because you're gonna get, I mean, even if you take a Clint Capella or somebody like that who could go out there and get 24 rebounds for you, I mean, he's still gonna catch a lob, he's still gonna get a putback.
Right.
So just the fact that Rodman was out there for that long and doing that and didn't score, it's kind of crazy. I do think that one thing I thought while watching some of the old Rodman highlights is that Rodman, again, comparing eras, and I know this isn't fair, but it's like Rodman was getting a lot of rebounds that Westbrook gets criticized for. I mean, he's like running down rebounds away from his own teammates and stuff, you know what I mean? Just because like that's his thing. Like he's like, I'm gonna grab all these rebounds, you know. And we see that now, like if it's anywhere close, like teammates run out of the way so Westbrook could get them, you know, type of deal. And that's like, it's just interesting, but obviously it's like, oh man, just look at this guy's hustle, look at the effort, look at that, and it was all there. I get it, but at the same time, it's just funny to see the difference.
Yeah, and those earlier clips of him playing college, or earlier with the Pistons, you know, catching lobs and stuff like that. You know, we know that obviously that he's athletic. I mean, super athletic, and he can score. And like you said, you probably wouldn't have that happen in the league now because you're triple team and James Harden and he just throws it up to Clint Capella and you know it's a dunk and you know there goes your 2 points. You could have 10 points out that a game. And I think that is, you know, mentioning that a very interesting aspect of Rodman is how he got to the NBA. You know, here before the episode, if you would have asked him where Dennis Rodman went to college, there's no way I would have been able to tell you. And the fact that his college coach essentially just grabbed him off a court and said, "Hey, you want to come play with us?" And he agreed and then went to play. You know, I don't think that's mentioned enough because that's incredible too.
Well, I think that's one of the things when you look at this whole Bulls story and the whole way in which that this three-headed monster between the way that Pippen, as we talked a little bit about last week, and the way that he came from being a ball boy or manager or whatever he was to now all of a sudden playing to now all of a sudden getting drafted. You know, and Rodman, obviously the same story. So you have these guys out of small Southern schools who nobody really knows about, and now all of a sudden finds himself in the NBA draft and then eventually finds themselves of part of the greatest dynasty ever. It's just wild. It's wild to think about. Obviously we all know MJ's story and how that all came about, but to hear those guys' their ability and their path to the league has definitely been fun. It's been a fun part to, like I said, to kind of learn a little bit more about these guys.
Yeah, as much as Jerry Krause gets as much crap as he's gotten the last couple of weeks, I mean, to put that team together with you know, like we said, obviously Scottie Pippen coming essentially unnoticed, and you know Dennis Rodman making that deal work. Even though he did get a little help with that one, you know, that takes some negotiation and you know some good I guess some good skills and stuff like that. So he deserves some credit for that too.
I was gonna say that's one other thing too that I noted was that Jerry Krause looked a lot better in this episode than he did in the first two.
Yep.
You know, they showed more of the mastermind architect behind what we've kind of known in being able to pick those types of situations out. You know, Phil Jackson obviously was the big one tonight, and what he saw in him and making that bold move, which is also interesting, I guess, from my perspective, is in the fact that he made such a bold move to get Phil Jackson in there, and then ultimately obviously made the bold move to kick him out too. Is just wild, and it'd be interesting to know a little bit more behind the curtains as far as what Jerry had going on, and maybe we'll get there too. But yeah, I think it was something where he was obviously enemy number one after the first night, but I think after tonight he saved a little face, I think, in everybody's minds as far as how his part in this whole dynasty.
Yeah, I totally agree, and it was very interesting and they didn't really dive into it very much, but I would love to know what the reasoning he gave Doug Collins and why he fired him, because he was in the Eastern Conference Finals the year before, and essentially they made it sound like Krause just said, "I think that Phil Jackson could or should be a head coach, so you're fired." Yeah. So I'd really like to know what that conversation was like a little bit more in depth.
Yeah, no, it was. I agree. I mean, it's interesting. Obviously, he had success, and so like, what was the reasoning? It might be interesting to go back and take a look. I also thought it was funny too because again, going back to, I guess we talked a little bit before about jumping on, and there's a big part of this in which that you're remembering stuff. There's a big part of it in which that you didn't know. And then there's obviously a huge part is like, oh yeah, I remember that. And it helps as you go through the documentary. And one is that, I mean, we all knew that he didn't coach for very long. I couldn't remember if it was 2, 3, 4 years, what it was, but you know, I knew that he wasn't there that long. And so I kind of knew the end was coming. And so at the very beginning, when he had mentioned all the things that Jordan did while he was there, I was like, all right, he's totally just, because obviously several years later while he's doing that episode, I'm like, he's just setting the table to be like, hey, I wasn't that bad. Like Jordan won an MVP, won Defensive Player of the Year, he won All-Star MVP. Like Jordan was killing when I was there. And then you hear the full circle, the story of Phil Jackson. Yeah. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, he probably has a good argument there, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, it was not performance-based, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, it's another awesome episode. Hopefully we'll get into a little bit more, about Michael in this Michael Jordan documentary. But we enjoy making these videos and talking a little bit afterwards, and we'd love to hear from you guys as well. So hit us up on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram at Shooters Touch IA, and we're posting all these videos on YouTube as well, obviously. So comment below what your thoughts are, and we will see you guys next week.